Easy E, how are we?
Shawnee, I tell you what, I watched Ireland play in the old soccer ball there. I haven't felt about depression like this, I don't think ever. I don't know if I can keep watching this.
I'm gonna pull back the curtain on this podcast.
Oh,
You watch that, right? And we have a guest, and it is actually this week's guest in the podcast. And you were like, you were talking to me, it was like a minute left in the game, whatever it was, and our guest's about to come on. And I just seen how dejected you were. And like obviously we're Irish, all the rest. I full disclosure, didn't know the game was on. My 49ers are back this weekend. I'm more interested in that, if I'm honest with you. Ireland are doing a whole hell of a lot. But you as a kid with your dad and all the rest, you have traveled to, you were in France when Henri handballed. I think Henri is a legend. I love the stuff he's doing now, but you'll probably never forgive the guy. Like you have been to all the big games the last 10 years, and then to watch their performance today, and then you had a podcast. I'm like, I don't know if Eric's in the right mind space for this podcast. We may
yeah,
have to
yeah.
cancel this episode.
You actually said it to me. You said you better do the intro and explain when you're in foul humor. But yeah, no, from Henry handballs, yeah, seen it all. That was always my dream to play for Ireland, and then got close and then got fat. So, I was always knocking around. I was an okay talent. Just yeah, sometimes you need a broken look. But I've always loved international football more so than my club football. But I do like my club football as well. But I love international football. But yeah, it was just depressing. It was for a game that doesn't need to be hyped up for. It was a very underwhelming performance from professionals. So that's all I can really say about that.
Okay,
But
well, let's go with your own training. Maybe focus on. Every time the 49ers break my heart every February, I'm like, you know what? I gotta focus on my own stuff, and you'll see. Like, I'll start doing loads of races and stuff, get myself back on track. And it's happened so often now. I didn't even hurt that Super Bowl as much. 24 hours after was horrible. But let's say you were focused on your own training and stuff this week. How is that going?
so far, so good. We put up a post during the week about you did intervals at a 340. Not that I was keeping track of your training. 343, 347, 345. And I was like, oh, Sean's getting a head start. So I went and said, right, I needed to do longer intervals. And I was like, 5 minute intervals, take it easy. 5:30 pace. That's grand. So I did the 10-minute warm up. Heart rate stayed relatively below 140. I was like, oh, I think I'm getting fitter. Did my first interval at a 5:20, 5:18. Boom, 187 beats per minute. By the time I got to the second and third, and people would have seen it in the story, my heart rate got to 198 beats per minute. And that was trying to maintain a 5:20 for 5 minutes. Ah, Sean, like I'm so deflated. Now, I got a lot of responses going. Have you considered a treadmill? First of all,
Yes.
fuck you. That's not the plan. You're clearly not listening. I said I was going to train in this stupid heat, and I can't do that. But yeah, I have
in your
thought about it a
defense in
lot.
that, in your defense in that, because I thought about that afterwards. What else I got to think about? I did think about that afterwards, and you had mentioned whether it's a true goal or like whether you do it or not. You're not 100% sure, but geez, I'm actually blanking on where we talked about this in the podcast and not, so we may have to edit if we haven't. The 90K across Dubai. Did we mention the
Yeah, we did.
podcast?
Yeah,
We
yeah,
did
yeah.
mention the
Across
podcast.
Qatar.
So
Yeah.
for you to do that, you need to have like train on a treadmill. It obviously it gets you fitter, but it's not going to acclimatize you as much to train out down the roads to if you are going to do that journey across to Dubai. You can't, and obviously it won't be as warm,
Qatar,
but if you
Sean. It's
train
like you
this
don't
heat,
even listen to me.
Qatar, Dubai, it's can I say it's all the same? The Middle East, but
Yeah.
across the 90K across that you're going for. You're living in different places, by the way, over there. It's very hard to keep up with you.
But yeah,
People
it's
listen to
look.
podcasts are thinking you're in Dubai, you're a guitar. They don't even know.
Yeah, well, look, but it is, it's just something that I've never been exposed to. And after I return home from this, I'll probably never expose myself to this kind of consistent temperature for training again and humidity. And it's just, yeah, it's just something that it's so hard. It's just really hard. And I've gotten so far into it now because I built it up with walking originally. And if you go back to the episodes, I was walking 8K a night and struggling. Then that got easy. And now it's a shuffle and struggling. And now we're into intervals and struggling. And we're slow. And the temperature is coming down. Like today, it was only 38 degrees, which was a hell of a lot better than the 45s we were looking at. So I'm increasing fitness as temperature is coming down. And for me, I'm that committed to it now that if I do take the treadmill, I'll feel like a bit of a failure, if that makes
Okay.
sense. just to pet my
Yeah.
ego that I can run for 25 minutes at a 5 minute kilometer, or I can just have a really bad Strava and just pig it out at an 8 minute or a 7 minute. And, when I'm running at the fives and, I just feel the sense of achievement. And I haven't felt this sense of achievement from a training run or a hardship, I suppose, and sense of achievement because they, like, when your Garmin asks you, how did that feel? I am honestly like, that was a 10.
Mm.
It's like I haven't felt this bad since my best ever 5K effort, and I failed 4 or 5 times before I got it. And it's every training session. Okay, the easy runs, but easy runs, you're so sweaty. You're so drained, and it just feels hard. Yeah, I suppose like some people have great advice. Don't get me wrong. I'm not shitting on people saying, would you not just go on a treadmill? No, I get it, but at this point, I'm so far into it. It's now September. We're on the downward trend. If I give up
It's
now,
getting easier. Yeah.
yeah, I've wasted suffering May, June, July, August, and now it's in the time where I can actually start doing more. And it was something Brandon said in a previous episode as well, just and in a chat with us, was like, Eric, just be very careful. You can't train your 5, 6 days a week you were doing in Ireland. This is hard. And it's that's sitting in my head that's keeping my sanity. That it is only 3 training sessions, maybe a fourth session a week with strength work, with gym work, foundational. And as we move into the cooler weather now, it'll be 5 runs a week, up to 6 runs a week. And the long runs will actually get longer. Like I was happy with a 10K the other day in an hour and a half. Like that's
Yeah.
shit. But
There's
it's a sense of achievement. And that's where we are. And I suppose when you look at what I watched today, I would have rather run for 90 minutes now, to be honest. I would have rather suffer than watch that again. I actually feel less energetic after watching that game.
there's something rewarding in the struggle. And I suppose when you're midway through that, if you were to hop on the treadmill now, it's like, well, I could have just hopped on the treadmill 3, 4 months ago. You are
Yeah.
halfway down that path this is your journey that realistically you may never get to do again or experience that because we're not going to hit the heat over here in our lifetime over here in Ireland doing that. So it's like you're midway through that journey and you're at the cusp of it getting easier. So why stop now? I do get where you're coming from that
Yeah,
now.
and not only that, like I'm working long days, and it's taxing on the body and the heat in the aircraft and everything around it, the vibrations of the aircraft, it's fatiguing. Yeah, and I've been here since the 26th of May. So this has been a long slog in terms of work and train and work and train. And I have booked some time off in October. So now in this phase, September into October, as the temperature cools down, there's going to be a more, I suppose, premeditated element to this 6 weeks now. There's a rest period coming. So it's going to be a little bit more focused. And that's what I've switched my focus to because for me the slog was September. And I did say it to you, we're going to keep going to September. And now I suppose in solidarity with those who are looking to do the marathon, my goal is to get me to mid-October and I'll have my 2 weeks, I suppose, me break because it's been a long summer, 6 days a week working. It's just long, and it's going to be a well needed break. And then I'm with everyone then, and hopefully I have a good enough foundation to keep up with everyone as we move towards the Barcelona Marathon.
Well, if it helps you any which way, because I'm doing the marathon at the end of October and then I'm doing high rocks in December. I've been adding my high rocks training once a week. I'm doing them on Saturday with Roisin, who I work with in ABC Klein, and doing her sessions. I feel like how you feel doing a 10K 1 hour 30. Like she's just kicking my ass all the way through and trying to do high intensity rower for 2 minutes straight onto a ski, burpee broad jumps without just lying there in a puddle of blood on the puddle, sorry, puddle of sweat, I should say, not blood. Feels like that though. Like during the last interval, a car was coming to the car park. It's like, just hit me now. Just end it now. So while the running's going great, trying to build up that muscular endurance is not quite happening for me. And then trying to be like, I feel like my training load has gone up with the marathon coming up and bringing the intervals. And I feel fast in the intervals and I'm getting the long runs in now. I'm like, I need to eat more, but at the same time, I thought I need to lose 1 or 2 kilos for that 80 kilo for the marathon. This week's episode of the podcast just came up at the absolute right time for me just to reframe my thinking on nutrition and what I need to do in these next couple of weeks leading up to the marathon. And anyone doing the marathon this week, this one is a must listen.
Yeah, this is a great one, Sean. And it's it's as much of an education as you want with all the basics slapped in, so you can't go wrong. And it's absolutely great. And even for us, again, front row seats to an expert, and that's what this is. It's a masterclass around nutrition and a great story as well from an athlete, and that's the most important part. And it's someone who understands what athletes have gone through and has their own trials and tribulations in terms of their athletic career, but has really become an expert in the field. It was humbling as well. I felt like a school child being told off for all the bad things. But me and you have said we've made every mistake since we started running, and we still continue to make them. And hopefully this episode, I got reassurance that, you know what, you're not as bad a person as you think you are for being who you are and fueling the way you do. And you know, there's some great nuggets in this. And we've done a lot of talking, Sean. It's probably time to let the expert do more of the talking and endure us for an hour.
Absolutely. With that said, it's this week's episode of the Any Given Run Day podcast. Let's go. So this week on the Any Given Run Day podcast, we have track and field athlete turned dietitian and performance nutritionist. He is the DCU athletics nutritionist, as well as the RPM power sports dietitian and director of Southeast Nutrition Clinic, Evan Lynch. Welcome to this week's episode of the Any Given Run Day podcast. How are you getting on?
Yeah, great. Cheers for having me on, lads. Delighted to be here. It's one way to spend the Saturday evening, you know?
So I have a quick question. You're currently charging your car with your checker. Emma is going to know whether you're bullshitting or not. And we're going to check in every now and again with Emma to find out the truth of the tales.
Okay.
When you're on the go in a career like this, and this is always my question because I have an electric car, it's very hard not to snack while you're waiting the 35, 40 minutes. So what do you do with a boredom snacking? That's one thing I have.
Oh, I snack. Oh, I won't lie. Loads of people think dietitians are like last at eating, whatever that means. But no, I'm pretty open on that. I eat chocolate and nuts and protein bars and things like that. I think you should be able to do that kind of stuff. And I know I do. I don't really see it as an issue. Sometimes I go for a walk. To be honest, I never get asked personal questions. This is funny. I mostly just end up playing games on my phone or watching YouTube shorts for the 45 minutes, and then I go home. That's usually what I do instead of snacking.
One addiction for the other.
Yes.
Mine is definitely the food addiction and the shorts. I eat while I watch the shorts. But to go from that, you have a fantastic kind of background in sport, and as Sean has read out, a fantastic accolade in sport and in terms of your knowledge. But can we start with how it started in sport for you? How did you get involved with track and field, and what was your career growing up?
Reluctantly is how I got involved in track and field. I saw a newspaper clipping of my dad when I was small. He was a race walker, and it was the first time he'd wore an Irish singlet, and it was from 1989. It was black and white, and I was like, geez, that's cool. And I was 7 or 8. So I said, gee, I want to do this. So my dad showed me how to race walk around our house. And we live in the countryside, so we could walk all the way around the house. And I just started going to the athletic club then at that point. And race walking doesn't exist for young athletes. It's not until I think you're 12 or 13 you can actually compete at it. So I had to run, and I hate running. Ironically enough, I absolutely hate it. I worked with loads of runners. You couldn't pay me to go for a run. I absolutely hate it. A race walk, I'll do 30K, 2 hours, no problem. I'll do that for as long as you want. So my parents tried to keep me in athletics, and I used to complain 2-3 times a week, every kind of week for 4 years straight until I could start race walking. Because that's what I wanted to do, because that's what my dad did. As soon as I started walking, I think I won pretty much everything you can win. All Ireland, indoors, outdoors, schools, community games, pretty much without fault, from under 12 to under 23, varsity, junior, everything in between. I did have a few Irish records. I'd say none of them are left, maybe 1 or 2. I don't keep track. And I got to represent Ireland, world and European stage. Never made it as a senior athlete. Reds caught me when I was in college. And I just never recovered from it. And with race walking, it's kind of one of those sports, like, you can be a fun runner. You can be shit at running and do it. And there's a huge community for that. If you're a bad race walker and you train publicly, people will mock you openly and throw things at you. That's the reality. So when the prospect of being a really high level or professional race walker, or just go to the Olympics, was starting to dwindle, I was like, right, you have to move on here. And that's how I closed my athletics career out. It wasn't my choice. I'd love to still be competing, but when the gap between where you are and where you kind of need to be is insurmountable, you just have to, pardon the pun, but walk away and pursue other things. So my career in sports dietetics facilitates that to a degree. I'd still love to be an athlete, but it doesn't work out for everybody.
What are the kind of margins when you're looking at race walking? Because the pace is quite fast, and obviously to be winning nationals, and like a lot of what people see when I see posts and stuff on comments on race walking, they can't believe the pace of a 3:44 or 3:40, 3:50 pace, or whatever the athlete is doing at the time.
Yeah.
Well, how far off? You say you just weren't at that pace, but obviously to be at Worlds and Europeans, how far off you were at the senior level? What was the gap that you were talking about, and how do you find? There's two questions here. How do you walk so fast? And then following on from that, what was the bit that was missing for you?
So a fully kind of cooked professional senior athlete will do 4-minute Ks or less for 20K, and they'll come in around 80 minutes. 82 minutes will get you to an Olympic Games, about 78 minutes and you're winning it. So that's what you're looking at.
Wow.
When I was 19, 20, I was on track for about an 88, 89 minute 20K, which is pretty good. That's kind of like, I still had 2 years of under 23 left. So I was tracking towards, by the time 2020 would have rolled around, if I'd managed to stay in the sport, I was tracking towards being an 82, 83 man. But that would have been a journey to get there. So I guess it's different to running in a way in that you go as a junior. Like as a junior, I walked kind of sub 43 or sub 44, almost 43 minutes for a 10K, which is world class, not medalist, but you're world class. Like you'll place well in most kind of championships. 1 year later, your racing distance doubles to 20K. That's the shortest distance you have. So it does take a couple of years of kind of being in that caterpillar phase of being a semi-developed senior athlete where you're not really winning anything. Your times compared to the boys winning the Olympics are reasonably shite. And if you can hold on and make it through that caterpillar phase, you end up being like a really high level athlete and you're placing well at all the major championships. What was missing for me? When I went to college, I learned about mental health, not academically. I experienced it firsthand. And I got some really poor dietary advice from a colleague. He was a South African Olympian. He's a race walker. I won't be any more specific than that. But as a 19,
all right, we'll name him in the comments. Don't worry.
As a 19-year-old, I went on a ketogenic diet because the guy I trained with, he was like, "This is the thing to do." So I did that. And I ended up with virtually all of the things that I talk about and all the reels I make, from libido issues as a 19-year-old. I had gastro problems. I couldn't recover from my training. Sleep was shite. My blood work went all over the place. And I just got injuries then that I couldn't recover from. No stress fractures because race walking has about 1/3 of the impact of running. So like nothing was going to break, but all of my tendons basically fell apart, for lack of a better description. And it plagued me for 2 or 3 years, at which point then my mental health really kind of reared its head between anxiety, bit of an identity crisis when you're not, if you build your whole image around I am an athlete, that's it, and that's taken away from you. I didn't really know who I was or what there was to me. So it's a bit of a shit show. And it took me a while to, I guess, just acclimatize to the idea that, okay, this mightn't work out for me. I have to figure out something else. So I became self-employed at 19, 20 and just kind of dove straight into this and never looked back.
Your Instagram makes so much sense now from the different things you talked about. Because I heard you talk about like identifying yourself as, hey, I'm going to call them out from the get-go. Hey, I'm Sean. I'm a CrossFitter. I think they're number one in terms of identifying themselves as that kind of,
Yeah.
they let you know about it and stuff like that and all the rest. I want to go back just on the nutrition side of things. So you mentioned this a couple of times in your stories,
Yeah.
and it links into a lot of your reels, I should say, and links into a lot of stuff we talk about in terms of endurance runners. What exactly is REDS?
Yeah. So for the lay pop, I'd say Emma could explain it at this stage. No, okay.
I tell you what, if looks could kill, no one can read, but I'm going to describe you're a dead man later. That is the look you got.
Yeah, you brought her in too early, man. Too early.
You don't need to worry about the South African. You've got bigger problems at home.
Thanks for all the questions. I suppose I'm the one being interviewed in all fairness. What is RED? So RED stands for Relative Energy Deficiency in Sport. Think of it as malnutrition for athletes. If you think of, say, not athletes, it's very hard in general, say in Western world, Western civilization, it's very difficult for people to not eat enough calories because of our environment. It's generally highly obesogenic. Food access is massive. You can procure calories very easily. True malnutrition in the Irish population is not that common in people under 70 or people who aren't like very ill. Free range people, if you will.
Yeah.
If we look at athletes who have huge exercise outputs, like some of my patients, yeah, they're patients technically, even if they're athletes, they're patients of mine if I'm working with them. A lot of my patients will have calorie requirements or builds in excess of 4, 5, 6,000 calories. That's just very hard to eat. And also, when we look at the impact of exercise, of stress, of sleep deprivation, even just habit or dietary preferences on appetite and satiety, what you'll often see is someone's desire to eat, their capacity to eat, their actual feelings of hunger can often be a barrier in actually reaching their calorie requirements. So what you see in some athletes, there's two strands to REDS. Very long-winded point. There's two strands to it. There's people who intentionally restrict calories and undereat to either, I don't know, be as light as possible or achieve a certain look. That's kind of the disordered aspect of REDS, where it comes from an unhealthy place. And then commonly, or maybe more commonly than we might think, there's people who just haven't a clue what they're doing. And they end up in my clinic and I'm like, you need to eat the equivalent to like 80 spuds a day. And they're just shocked. They thought exercise was for free. And that cohort of people just legitimately don't appreciate the calorie requirements of sports. So you can have intentional restriction or inadvertent or kind of well-intentioned but misdirected dietary management. And whatever way you strike it, if an athlete underconsumes calories or carbohydrates over a long period of time, it can basically affect every system in the body, from brain atrophying to muscle loss to you're having your reproductive endocrine system absolutely smashed to bits. So like it wouldn't be uncommon for ladies to lose their menstrual cycles or for lads not to be able to get boners. That would actually be a common outcome of that. Anything and everything in between, nutrient deficiencies, stress fractures, iron deficiency, that all can occur as a side effect of underfueling. So it's malnutrition for athletes. And it happens because athletes have high calorie bills, and in some cases, athletes are misinformed. In other cases, such as the athletic identity, which I might come back to, if what it means to someone to be an athlete is I must look really thin or really lean, the athlete will underfuel because they value being looked at as an athlete more than they do performing. And that's actually what drives their decisions. So that's REDS. I hope I answered the question.
Absolutely. Based
100%.
on that, so we are probably, by the time this podcast comes out, 6-7 weeks away from the marathon. I've been guilty of this. I feel like I perform better when I lose weight. So if I'm down to, I most of the year I walk around 83, 84 kilo. 1 year I got a pretty decent marathon time that I was happy with. I was around 80 kilo. So I feel like I need to lose weight, but I also need to fuel the systems you talk about. And sometimes I don't feel it as much. And I get another question that in a couple of minutes. But when like that balance between trying to lose weight for endurance running for a marathon, and I know you have your own thoughts on this one, which is why I'm bringing it up this way, and trying to fuel for a thing and getting that balance, wanting to lose weight for endurance. It's not necessarily the best approach, is it?
No, it's not. Do you know how many research papers there are that we know of that tell us if person loses X kilos, they'll be Y% better? So how many papers are there that show us what that relationship looks like?
Had I not stalked your Instagram today, I would have said a few.
Yeah, well, you have, so you know the answer is none. There's actually no science to say if this person loses X body fat or X kilos or X weight, they will clearly and demonstrably be quicker. That doesn't exist. That's actually a cultural thing. And I would say an example of weight stigma that exists in the sporting world. And it's very normalized because it's very normal to think that. It's very old school though. And what you'll find is people that say things like that, like, oh, you know, you need to be, if it comes from a coach, for example, you need to be lighter to run better, or God, you've too much fat in you there. If they're saying that to people who are already reasonably high level athletes, they're just not at the races. They're old school. And it's actually considered bad practice and not overly scientific, because that's someone's personal opinion, there's no research that suggests that. Because if we look at exercise performance, weight, if you looked at it as a pie chart, your actual physical weight and how that would then like impact exercise economy or running economy, VO2 max, it's small. And if we looked at the impact of, well, if this lad or lady focused on fueling properly, if they focused on being as strong as they possibly can, they focused on recovery, the net gain from that is exponentially higher than focusing on, can I lose 2 to 4 kilos? That's going to have minimal bearing on sports performance. What can happen and what does happen is when people go on diets or try to lose weight, they feel better. And that can be for a couple of reasons. They're paying attention to their diet and lifestyle. They're managing things a little bit better. But also, I can't ignore the fact that when people restrict their calories, they get this huge requisite bump in catecholamines and stress hormones, which make you feel okay when you're actually not. So it's kind of like a compensatory thing. For example, if you have a patient with anorexia nervosa, someone who engages in the most clinically severe version of calorie restriction, they will tell you, I feel great, I have loads of energy. And they're not lying. That's actually how they feel. But that's their body's survival and starvation mechanisms kicking into play. Similarly, in athletic cohorts, people who underfuel, with REDs in particular, we see massively elevated levels of stress hormones. And that can make you feel okay or energized when you're really not. So, in a very long-winded way, there's no research that I can point to or use and say, look, here's a dose-response relationship between how much weight I can help you lose and how much better you will be. There's only evidence against it that promoting weight loss and trying to perform at the same time, they're generally antagonistic to one another. And a lot of the research coming out, and I'm doing my doctoral degree on this, looking at body image in athletes, when we actually focus on weight and we overemphasize the importance of weight and appearance in sports, that actually massively increases an athlete's risk of having an eating disorder, engaging in disordered eating, and subsequently developing REDs, which is the opposite of performing well.
And I'm very much guilty of this as well, because in the build up to my last, now, look, I was kind of cheating because I gave myself 16 weeks to do an Ironman, and I started my training at 100 kilos. Yeah. And I knew cycling up a mountain with 100 kilos, physics just says that's going to be a harder day for me than it would be if I was 94, 93 kilos. But subsequently, with consistent training, my weight naturally came down because I was burning, but I was still very conscious. And my phrase was fuel the jet. You can't do it on empty. And I've had the hunger knock once, and it's something I swore I'd never do again. So it's, Sean had a scooter with me along that, and he can swear by every 2.5 kilometers, I think I ate someone's daily intake of calories on that track as well. And it saved me in the end to complete it. But I'm holding my hand up guilty that I associated being my best marathon was at 82 kilos. Now I'm very happy at 92, but I still think, I don't know if I'll be able to run that quick again. But this year is where I've said, no, I'm just going to be consistent and I'm going to do it at this weight and be stronger and everything. But for years, I have thought skinnier, lighter, jockeys are lighter, F1 racers are light. Everything around, everything I watch, they're light, they're fast. You know, you look at the marathon runners, there's not a pick on them. So you are what you see, I suppose. And for me, it just makes me feel like I'm just never going to achieve that and mental aspect. So I'm definitely guilty, and I'm sure a lot of people listening are probably the same.
I suppose, to clarify, I do actually help people lose weight all the time, even athletes. The only way we can lose weight with athletes is indirectly. It can't be the focus. If it happens while we're doing everything perfectly right, grand, well and good. Can only ever be moderate amounts, though, at a very moderate, underwhelming rate. So you can do that. And of course, you know, I'm well aware of sports physiology. If you have a patient or a client who is very clearly obese, very obviously obese, there is scope for improving performance with weight loss. The vast majority of people that come to me for, like, you know, they have a marathon or a thing coming up, they're like, look, I need to lose. They always have a real specific number, 1, 2, 3, 4 kilos. Those are the people who are, maybe you need to listen here. Like, that's not going to make that much of a difference. If you're 4 stone overweight, yeah, you need to lose weight, or you would benefit from a performance perspective from losing weight. So I guess it depends where you're starting from, what your goal is, what your BMI is, to be perfectly honest, as to how much we would value that with performance, but shouldn't ever be the goal, I suppose. And there was another thing I wanted to say there. I see examples all the time, and I never remember the people's names, probably because I have ADHD. I wish I could, because it would be a great reference. I see these stories popping up on, like, Clinical Athlete or Satius Mag or whatever, about these athletes who've gained weight and they're having their best year ever. And they're sometimes posted up as examples contrary to that kind of like skinny is better idea. Oh, fucked if I remember their names, though. But yeah, they do exist. I'm not making it up. I see it all the time in my own kind of personal practice as well. But that idea that skinnier is better or lighter is better, it's erroneous. And it's easy for me to say it because I did that. I took that approach, and it destroyed my physical and mental health and ruined my athletics career. And I also work with athletes on the other side of the fence. I see professional athletes all the time. I'll give you a clinical snapshot of a professional athlete from either jockeying or endurance, right? 3 to 4 times more likely to have an eating disorder. Depending on the cohort you look at, 60% at least, sometimes 90% has REDS or is at high risk for REDS. Early onset osteoporosis, fertility issues, mental health issues, body image issues, all exceptionally prevalent in those cohorts. It's very easy to see someone be good at sport and think, whoa, class, I'd like to be like that. I wouldn't swap places with a lot of the athletes that struggle with this stuff. That's shit, because from personal experience, if you're wrapped up in it, you kind of have to be an athlete. Like, I'm Evan the athlete. If to them that means I do these behaviors, I eat these foods, I'm only seen to kind of not eat these things, and I act like this and I look like this, that's all they think about. And it's a very it's a very kind of poor quality of life to have, but it looks great on Instagram and people really gravitate towards it. But it's shit crack. I wouldn't.
And the Olympics itself, as much as it is a spectacle to watch these phenomenal athletes, you're looking at goddesses and gods walking around chiseled, the sacrifice they're given. Some are probably carrying, because they're in that category of people you've just described, some of them are potentially teetering with a lot of these problems through their career.
Oh, yeah. Oh, 100%. I mean, yes, absolutely. There are a lot of athletes with issues like this that I'm describing here. It's just not great marketing, is it, for athletes to say, you know, this is what's going on. You know, if they talk about how they're struggling, it could affect sponsorship, it could affect funding, etc. It could affect their followers. People in Ireland, anyway, tend not to be very nice when you say, oh, I have actually a problem and I'm struggling. You just get hit with, You don't have problems. There's bigger problems happening. Get over it. Oh, look at this lad here looking for attention. Um, so I could see people not volunteering this information as well at the same time, you know?
Yeah, we're very much a kick you when you're down kind of nation as well. We're very good at helping when it's in the extreme. Like we're very neighborly, but
Yeah.
we're very, very tough on each other. And I suppose it's kind of like a cultural stigma to talk about these kind of things. And even like you mentioned, menstruation in female athletes, it's only really becoming an okay topic to talk about over the last couple of years because of female athletes starting to highlight the issues of losing their periods and different things through malnutrition and overtraining and a few other things. And we've had some great guests on our show that have schooled me and Sean, and we've been introduced to these conversations over the last couple of years. And it's conversations like this that even for me sitting here, I wasn't aware of the statistics. I just seen the Greek goddesses and gods of the Olympic Games and thinking, I need to put this burger down and go try. You know, like it's just you look at it and go, oh, what am I doing wrong? But as you're saying, you need to enjoy life as well. And sometimes a better fueled athlete is a happier athlete and a better performing athlete.
You said something interesting there. What am I doing wrong here? I need to put this burger down and something like that. Something that was said to me that I never forgot. I don't even remember who said it to me. It was the year I first got an Irish singlet. I was in good shape. Someone saw me eating a bar of chocolate and said, "You probably shouldn't be doing that." I was 15. And I said, "Yeah, you're right." And then I stopped doing that and felt terrible about doing that for almost a decade. And if I stop to think about it now, that's an insane thing to say. There's no pathway by which eating chocolate or a burger affects recovery, affects VO2 max, affects lactate curves, proprioception, skills, nothing. It's totally irrelevant. That idea, like clean eating there, that's something that a lot of athletes would have in place. I am an athlete, therefore I don't eat burgers, I can't eat junk food, I have to eat salad and blah, 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 blah. And interestingly enough, and I might actually see if I can do this as part of my doctoral research. Athletes who have healthy eating ideals, like they apply like the food pyramid to their sporting endeavors, will consistently underfuel, because when we try and eat healthily, it's smaller portions, not big portions of carbs, whole grains, vegetables. That's almost the opposite of what's required for sports nutrition protocols. So keep your burger, it's not doing you any harm there. If anything, it'll improve your recovery there, Eric, and maybe
Don't
bump
worry.
up
I felt bad for about 30 seconds until the shot put came on and then I picked it back up again.
There's hope. There's hope. Yeah.
You talked about the importance of carbs there. You touched on ketogenic diet before. With endurance and going back to Dublin again for the marathon, a lot of people might do a ketogenic diet because they feel it's more efficient to burn fat for long distances. And then when it comes to race day, geez, if I put in those carbs, I'll use your words, rocket fuel. I'm off to the races then because I haven't had carbs in ages. All of a sudden I have carbs. It's like not having caffeine for 14 days and I have caffeine. I get that big boost.
Yeah.
But carbs seems a lot more important when you're talking about for training after sessions and all the rest. So using fat to burn during training and then carbs on race day, not a good idea?
Not a good idea. Also not a good reflection of how the human body works. At any given moment, like right now, we're all sitting on our arses here. You're burning a combination of fat, protein, and carbs right now. It's just the permutations of those things change depending on how hard your body is working or how fast your heart is beating, I suppose. Even when you're doing, say, exercise at 65% of your VO2 max, like fat burning territory, there's still a good chunk of that coming from carbohydrates. It's oversimplified by people where it's like, if I have carbs, I turn off fat oxidation. And that's actually not true at all. You just don't use your glycogen as much. So the way to think about this, for sports performance, irrespective of whether you're on a high fat, low carb, whatever diet, running out of glycogen is going to make you hit the wall and make you perform very, very poorly and feel very, very crap. It's your petrol tank for being an athlete, if you will. We have enough to last about 100 minutes. if you train fat adapted with the intent of carbon up on race day, we've actually studied that all that happens is when you go on a high fat diet, you get insulin resistance, not dissimilar to type 2 diabetes. If you then throw in loads of glucose or carbs there, you're actually physically incapable of utilizing them. Furthermore, most people struggle with carbohydrates intra race. If you don't practice fueling for the weeks leading up to an event, there's a very good chance you're going to get sick if you try and take 6 gels going through your Dublin Marathon or whatever it might be. And I guess even if someone here listening is like, well, I just won't take any carbs at all then, and I'll use my infinite store of fat. Like, okay, grand, do that. You probably will get through your marathon, but you'll do so about 10 to 15% slower, or it'll be significantly slower than it should be, and you're going to work way harder to achieve a subpar result. So at every rung of the intensity ladder, being carved up generally results in faster performance, athletes feeling better, less gut issues, even better heat tolerance. I know it won't be hot in October. It's warm today, like in the Kerry Bay Ultra is happening right now. When it gets hot, you burn carbs at such a significantly higher rate. I feel like that's not relevant to the question you just asked me, though. But
no, but it's making sense to me because I'm living in the desert, so I'm gonna keep my burgers even more now. But it is good, and I suppose when we're looking at, and again we're talking about the marathon because that's what a lot of people are looking at, and Dublin is a key point, and we can go on to the longer distances. But there's people who are doing their 5Ks, 10Ks, and their half marathons now who listen to us as well, who are finding their feet.
Yeah.
What are probably some of the more basic things? And then we'll go back again to the athlete because it's super interesting. But when people come in to you with the basic knowledge, what's things that still kind of shock you that is still not common knowledge, or is still you still can't believe you have to go back to the foundational level that so many people are making these simple mistakes?
There's so many.
That's such a bad reflection of society. And
Jesus, I mean, fuck it.
And is it driven by Instagram experts that we're actually seeing more problems now instead of getting good information? You're getting your information from your other athlete or now your Instagram influencer, and all of a sudden you're doing this fad diet.
I'll just go off of today, right? I had 6 patients today in my clinic. So I work 6 days a week, unfortunately. The sources of misinformation that I heard today, someone was told by a nutrition expert to do a gluten and lactose free diet to lose weight. So that's not a thing. That doesn't help. So that's one. Someone was told that drinking Coke Zero will assuredly give them cancer, which is not accurate and not what the actual research says. So that's 2. I'm pretty sure someone told me today that supplementing with vitamin D would hurt their immunity. They were told that by a doctor, that it would make it worse, which is bizarre because that's not true. That's the opposite, in fact. Number 4, a patient with anemia was told you don't need to supplement with that. You can just eat your way out of it. You need 50 milligrams of elemental iron to treat anemia, which is the equivalent of eating roughly 10 steaks a day for 3 months. So that's true. That's just today. I mean, off the top of my head. So there's lots. If I think about athletes and sports people being encouraged to do fasted training or doing fasted training, that's a really crap idea. It doesn't improve fat oxidation at all. You still actually burn the exact same amount of carbs and fats because you have some glycogen left. But all it does is it impairs bone health. So it increases bone turnover instantaneously and challenges iron metabolism. It's also an independent risk factor for developing REDs. So that's one common thing that lots of people do. Overusing electrolytes. So taking massive heavy duty electrolytes to do really not massive levels of exercise. That's another issue that people get into because they think they need the salt. If you're a park run candidate, you definitely do not need the salt. Your Irish diet definitely gives you way more salt than you need. Recovery, then, people flocking towards protein right after exercise. for anyone doing a kind of an aerobic based sport, sugary carbs right after training are what you're looking for. If you eat semi consistently and reasonably well, protein is grand. Most athletes do not need to worry about protein. Most people way overshoot their requirements at the expense of getting an adequate carb intake. So those would be the top three things: fasted training, over electrolytes, no carbs after training, focusing on protein instead. Any athlete, if they address those things, will minimize their risk of stress fractures, REDs, iron deficiency, having high blood pressure, and would recover quicker if they just fix those three things.
There's so many different ways I can go on this one, but just the sugary drinks afterwards. Eric will tell you I'm a big fan of running the Lucozade and all the rest. But
Yeah.
one of the big energy drinks that's popping up now, and I don't know if it hits any of our cohort listening, probably a little bit younger, the Prime energy drinks. And one of the things on them is sugar free. But
Yeah.
so you're for hydration and recovery and all the rest. I think they put the top of recovery. I could be talking wrong there, but definitely hydration you talk about. If there's no sugar in it and sugar is good and that's in Lucozade, are Prime drinks, that kind of thing, not that good, what they supposedly say, or am I reading wrong into that?
No, they're not great.
So
Like,
$2.50 a bottle.
yeah,
I've never tasted them now, but they're dear.
I'll be honest, I've never actually picked one up. So I don't even know what the ingredients are, but I have heard that, the sugar content is very low to negligible, you're telling me. Energy, generally people mean energy in two different ways, either stimulants and feeling energized. So I wonder if it has caffeine in it. I'm
It
not
does,
sure.
yeah.
Okay, that's probably where they're going with that. If it has caffeine, what caffeine does is it blocks your perception of fatigue, which is not the same thing as having energy. That's what's an analogy? You think of an analogy? No, you can't. Okay.
I didn't get to see the reaction this time, but I have a feeling you're getting slapped twice
No.
later.
Imagine hypothetically, if I broke your arm, right? You were sitting there with a broken arm, and then I give you morphine. You don't feel like you have a broken arm, but you still do. You still have a problem. You're just not aware of it, right?
Yeah.
Think of caffeine and fatigue. The fatigue is the broken arm. Caffeine is the morphine. You can still be in a huge energy deficit, sleep deprived, feeling crap, not in a position to train, and you can load up on loads of caffeine and then feel fine. But that subjective feeling of fineness does not accurately reflect where you're at physiologically. So people mistake that for, I have loads of energy. What's actually happening is you're just taking high dose stimulants, so you feel better than you actually are. That's probably what Prime Energy does. From a bioenergetics perspective, looking at, say, the actual calorie and carb content, it's not at the races. If it doesn't have that much carbs or sugar in it, it's probably not worth using. I'm pretty sure I've also heard other people kind of slated saying it had like strange levels of electrolytes and just unnecessary ones inside it as well. Athletes really only need to worry about sodium. If you're worrying about potassium chloride or magnesium or anything like that around exercise, it's just a waste of time. You don't actually lose appreciable levels of that in any level of exercise. So it's not a consideration to make. Prime is just fancy marketing and celebrity profiteering off of generally poor levels of information and a trust in people we follow on Instagram.
You mentioned the Irish diet and having high levels of salt. And I would be one of those people that interchangeably do salt and sodium, even though they're different things you talk about. But salt tabs for endurance races, like for example, obviously the Dublin Marathon, if we're getting enough salt in our system, are salt tabs a waste of time, or because you're losing a lot of sweat during the marathon that you should have one during it? Would you recommend the endurance, someone listening to this doing the marathon, would you recommend them having a salt tab, or that you have to, like you talked about sweat tests and stuff before, which I'd never actually heard of, that you should or shouldn't do? Loaded question there.
There's a couple of aspects to this. How will I start? So think of yourself as a big glass of my waddy, right? You want it just right in terms of concentration. When we look at sodium and salt, people tend to focus on how much am I losing in my sweat, which is a bit of a red herring. We more so care about the salt or sodium content in our bloodstream, because that's what's more physiologically relevant. your body will work really hard to keep your sodium levels nice and steady in your bloodstream. As you sweat, fluid or water is taken out of your blood. That's where it comes from. It's all of the stuff in between your arteries and your veins. About 15 liters of stuff there, if I'm not mistaken, for the average person. As you sweat, the stuff in your blood gets more concentrated. So if I got an athlete to sweat for an hour or two and I blood tested them, which I will never do because I'm afraid of needles and blood. But if I did, true. If I did, what I would see is their sodium levels would rise massively as they get more and more dehydrated. So the misdirection here is make panic that the athlete has high levels of sodium in their sweat. Replace that. Ignore the fact that their blood sodium levels are rising all the time. And then what happens if we add salts to that? We're just challenging our body's own homeostatic mechanisms. It doesn't make any sense. So they've actually done modeling studies on this, and it's counterintuitive. If you're a high sweater and an average drinker, you're going to get more and more dehydrated as you progress through a bout of exercise. If you're not able to replace 70% of your fluid losses for events up to 10 hours, all you need is an isotonic, like a Lucozade Sport, to keep your blood sodium levels steady. That's all. You do not need high dose electrolytes. The caveat is if you're a low sweater and you're able to drink all of that, not only are you losing salt in your sweat, but then you're diluting the diminishing sodium levels in your bloodstream. So you're making a very weak glass of my waddy out of yourself, so to speak. So the low sweaters and high drinkers are the people who need the big salt taps. Nobody else. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah.
And that is one I scientifically proved on myself when I'm a big sweater and I thought I'll need salt tabs, and I took one early and I completely dehydrated myself to the point I had to stop and I was in pain, urinating. And the only way I fixed it was drinking a hell of a lot of water for the remaining of that marathon. And that was a mistake I'll never forget because I was scary. And that was me figuring out I don't need salt tablets. And it's the misconception that I've been led through from other athletes saying, "Oh, you sweat a lot, you're covered in white," and I'd be white. There'd be salt all over my body from 10K on, and I was told salt tablets, they're the way to go for you, and it backfired majorly.
The only time, and I'm actually doing it at the moment with a really, really massive ultra runner. He's not massive. He's well known, I suppose. He's done a very long race, but given the sheer length of his race, it is important that I understand and know his sweat rate and then the sweat sodium content, so we can actually model and prepare for getting through that event. Because when you do really long events, the risk is hyponatremia, that you deplete your sodium levels to such an extent that you're a very weak glass of my waddy, so to speak, that you have very low sodium levels in your blood, which can be dangerous, fatal in some very rare cases. So that's a risk factor that most people will never be at risk of. For any ultra endurance runner like Carryway Ultra Plus, you have to worry about hyponatremia, irrespective of how sweaty that person is. So it is important to know the sweat rate and kind of prepare for that. The average sweat salinity is about 1 gram per liter. The average sweat rate is about 1.2 liters an hour. So those are some general numbers if you don't have access to sweat testing facilities, which most people don't, to be fair.
So salt tabs to the side. The other thing then for marathon runners would be gels. And you talk about the importance of carbohydrates. Is there such thing then as too many gels, or is there not?
The best amount of carbs is the most amount you can hack. That's the reality, because there's actually linear correlation all the way from 0 to 70 grams an hour. In performance, the more you take all the way up to that mark, the quicker you are in running races, which is cool. If you can get up to 75, 90 grams, that's actually far more than enough for sports performance, for marathon purposes. The odd person can go higher than that. You just don't really need to, I guess. So for most people, a good general heuristic is taking gels every 30 minutes and taking sports drinks on the course where possible. If you're new to gels, starting with something like a High Five Aqua Gel, which is very low viscosity and it's about 23 grams of carbs. That's very easy. It's a very unintimidating place to start. If you're a bit more seasoned and you want to get more bang for your buck, trying something like 226er gels or beta fuel gels or the Martin gels. They have bigger ones now. You'll get 40 to 50 grams of carbs in those gels. That might be worthwhile for people who just want to take one every 45 minutes or one an hour and still meet their needs. That's totally fine to do. But can you take too many gels? Yeah, I actually had someone about 2 weeks ago who took 4 gels in the first hour of a triathlon run phase and was very sick. And like, that wasn't the shock at all. Like, we figured it out really quickly. So no, it is possible. Most people will never take too many gels. Every 30 minutes is a good tempo to take them at. Practice it in training. Start with smaller ones. Graduate your way up to the big ones if you can.
Anyone listen to this podcast, and if they say they haven't, they're an absolute liar, or they haven't ran long enough, has at one stage or another squatted in a field during a long run, as you put it, as needed to go. It has happened. It has happened to me. One of the things you talk about that would be a lot of people talk about for, I suppose, not weight loss, but just having good diets and these different types of advice. And I've been guilty of this because it's an easy thing to do, is overnight oats. But you reckon that's not good for before a long run? And obviously, your bran flakes or stuff high in fiber would be an issue as well. So what do you think? It just needs to be higher carbs and stuff for morning of long runs, or what way would you advise people?
I get so much fucking shit for saying this as like evil, actually. Low fiber, higher carb makes way more sense to minimize risk of gut issues. Depends on the person. Some people say they're grand. People have different gastric emptying rates. Like, it's individual how long it takes to digest food. Fibrous dishes can be a few hours. Like a big bowl of porridge with like raisins and seeds in it can take a few hours to digest. So if you're only leaving like an hour and a half to 2 hours, you might be training fasted technically because you haven't absorbed it. What I would generally recommend are things like Cocoa Pops, Rice Krispies, bagels, pancakes.
Chicken and rice, no.
Well, definitely fine. Chicken is fine. Not too oily. 2 hours, 2.5 hours, you could do that for sure. It's a good shortcut is beige and bland, white, like a shade of beige or white, and no fiber. Fat. If you follow that, it's impossible to screw that up.
Chicken is white, I suppose. I cannot believe that all the weeks that I'm actually sick over that. But
anyway. He's been giving me some amount of abuse for eating chicken and rice 2 hours before races, but it works for me. It works for me, and everyone is different.
Yeah, you're on the ball there. Do you add veggies to it though? That's the question I have. Is it a start?
Sometimes there'll be peppers, red pepper.
Okay.
It's whatever's from the Chinese from the night before. He gets a big portion.
It's not that bad. It's not that bad. The curry sauce just fell into it. I just don't know how it got there.
You're button and fields.
I have a very, very long-winded question.
Okay.
So I back in the day, like good 10, 12 years ago, I did fitness instruction. And with that comes the nutrition. I don't even want to say module in front of you because I think most personal trainers barely touch on nutrition and they shouldn't be doing it. I'm not just saying it because you're here, but it's like very basic stuff and move on. But there was an interview process and there was like 3 of us there. And one of the questions was, how many meals should you have per day? And the girl, she answered, 3 meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner is grand. And I knew the answer they were looking for was wrong because they wanted the answer to be 6 meals a day to stoke the metabolic flame or whatever the furnace for the body and all that stuff was the answer. But then further down, it was like, no. You just need 3 meals a day. If it fits your macros, that's all that matters throughout the course of the day. And that's it. And then the anabolic window came in as like, you need to have protein 30 minutes after a session. And then later on it came, well, that's not the case. And then I was like, okay, I think I have this now. As long as you have your food anywhere throughout 24 hours, you're good. And then I watched your reel. I'm like, fuck, I got it wrong again. It's you have to have your carb timing not a certain amount of time, that's paraphrasing, but you talk about not having such long periods of having no food throughout the day. Like I'm up at 6 in the morning, like I'm up earlier most mornings for work, and I'll probably work late at night just because middle of the day, personal training, all the rest is just the way it is. That job, and it'd be a good, 6, 7 hours sometimes before I try to have food. Lately, because of all the training, I just need to have something in because I just feel I'm hungry all the time. But there is something. My question is, after all this, it doesn't matter. It does matter. Intermittent fasting, 8 hour window of eating, 16 hours of nothing. There is something to nutritional timing of food throughout a day, especially for training. No?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Don't elaborate. Just say yes. Sorry, just ruin the podcast right now. Just don't elaborate. Just unplug your car and drive home. Hang up.
There's a lot of misconception on this, though. So I'm assuming you heard a lot of different phrases of saying you've heard constantly coming into you. I'm like, I've had to correct this, this, and this. Like,
Yeah.
so what is your thoughts on this now?
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to equally long-winded answer this. So I get a lot of patients saying, they say this. Be very careful who they is that you were listening to, or who they are that you're taking your advice from. I'm a good source of advice for anyone listening. Do listen to me. I'm not part
Hold on, we need to fact check with the boss beside you.
Be careful what they say, okay? They say intermittent fasting is great, and then next week they say ketogenic diets are great, and then they will say, no, you don't need carbs after training, just have it in the morning, or they will turn around and say it's the other way around. They will always change their mind. The tenets of sports nutrition, evidence-based sports nutrition, have actually largely unchanged for like 30 years. Right?
Oh, wow.
So it's not new knowledge. It's just lost in a sea of bullshit to say it's important to eat regularly. Don't go long gaps without eating. Try and eat every 3 to 4 hours. Carbohydrates matter. We've known that for like 100 years at this point. That is not new. You do need protein. You do need more if you're active. Anything other than that, it's like personal preference, what fits your lifestyle. If it fits your macros is grossly negligent, because you'll have people eating tubs of Ben and Jerry's and then nuts and like, I don't know, 4 steaks because it fits your macros. That's a carte blanche to give yourself non-communicable diseases. So you do have to think more clinically than if it just fits your macros, because there's more to it than that. Timing does matter, though, to actually answer your question. And yeah, the research for looking at REDs, we are aware of something called a within-day energy deficiency. And it's basically chunks of 4 hours or more where an athlete is in a deficit of an average of 400 calories an hour or more. That's a within-day energy deficit. So if you train in the morning and you don't eat before or afterwards, that's within-day energy deficiency. Someone who exhibits or displays patterns of behavior like that, statistically speaking, are going to have REDs or REDs-esque symptoms or part of that syndrome. So that's not great. If we're trying to enhance recovery, timing matters after workouts, because we want the quick carbohydrates after training. If we want to enhance fueling for training beforehand, we need to match the digestion time with what the window of time is between eating and needing to use that fuel. So those things, ingestion time, pre-training, and digestion time, have to match up. So those are 3, or maybe I've given you 4 examples of how timing does matter, and that is important. And intermittent fasting, not important, not useful. Fasted training, not important or not useful. Pushing carbs to certain times of the day that has nothing to do with when you're training, not useful, actively unhelpful. Partitioning calories to an earlier or later part of the day, not useful, not really helpful. Apart from the timing stuff, the rest of the sound information that we give and know has been known for many years and is largely unchanged, actually.
So when we see all these studies, and again, we've mentioned it again on something on the podcast, is be careful who's also paid for the study. And it also comes back to the basics have been around for a long time. We're getting better at refining them, don't get me wrong, and the science is starting to work better with athletes and people like yourself working with athletes. You're starting to refine the fine percentages of what is giving them the best performance. When we're looking at a normal day for us who are going through our training, what are some key indicators in that day? Obviously, just eating regularly, but what are the basic 5 steps that people can take away in this for the remaining 8 weeks to just give them a good chance of understanding fueling, I suppose, over the next 8 weeks into the marathon? Very difficult because it's very broad and it's individual, but what are the key steps people should look for in terms of it?
Don't skip breakfast. That's a bad idea. I think if you're going training, bring something for after training, like a sugary thing. Chocolate milk works, bananas work, square bars work. That's good. An easy way to improve recovery is having something like a carb hit before you go to bed. It improves glycogen availability overnight. So that would be something I would look at. As we kind of lead into autumn time, upper respiratory tract infections and connective tissue injuries become much more likely in those with vitamin D deficiencies. And know that the cutoff point for what's adequate for an athlete versus a non-athlete is actually 50% higher. Athletes need roughly 50% higher vitamin D levels to be considered adequate. So vitamin D supplementation is probably a good idea and something that anyone training for Dublin 100% should start doing right now. That's 4 things. A 5th thing, one last thing. Always carry a water bottle around. Your fluid requirements are higher than you think. Baseline fluid requirements are about 35 mils per kilo. And again, the average sweat rate, I mentioned it earlier, is 1.2 liters an hour. People often grossly underhydrate or overhydrate right before training. You have your thing of water or fluids always by your side. The best thing to do is sip slowly and steadily throughout the day for optimal hydration, not over, not under, just right. So there's 5 things. I don't know if they're the best 5 things, but it's what I thought of first.
But to be honest, they're the ones that it's the most basic start for people. And even me, I'm kind of like, yeah, I need to be better with the water, particularly in the heat now. I'm more conscious of it here. But on the days off, when I'm not even venturing outside, I'm in the aircon, I'm like, the water intake isn't the greatest. And I feel it. I feel it the next day. But there's a lot of key things for people to, I suppose, give them the best start at things they may be able to tweak to give themselves the advantage for that PB or that extra confidence. And again, it's that mental confidence. If they're doing the right things with nutrition, with recovery, with training, that they can show up on that day and give the best effort possible, knowing that all is there.
Yeah. If there was a 6th thing, it would be talk to a sports dietitian like myself.
And on that note, Evan, someone listens to the podcast, how can I get in contact with you?
Yeah, very easily. Unfortunately, if you Google Evan Lynch, the Harry Potter actress Savannah Lynch comes up, which is a real killer. So actually Irish as well, so it's worse. You have to type in Evan Lynch Nutrition and you find me on Google. If you want to get me directly, it's evan@southeastnutritionclinic.com. I'm eLynch Fitnut on Instagram, or just Google Southeast Nutrition Clinic. I'm pretty easy to find otherwise.
We will have that Instagram handle in the show notes. And genuinely, I've loved watching your reels and stuff today, going through before this podcast. I love your no bullshit approach to it, and your approach of just, you're not saying things to try catch attention. It's just as in like outlandish things that people say to bring people. It's just like these, like you said there, your facts at the end. There was no mad pills or anything like that to take. It's just practical advice, and I love that about you. It's been great having you on for the last hour. Absolutely brilliant. A lot of information, that lot of take home messages for people, especially those training for a marathon in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I'll come back anytime, and Emma will vouch for this. I'm not an influencer. I don't have the enthusiasm to be an influencer. I couldn't possibly be that much fun. This is it. This is it.
Does it annoy you when you see like people spouting bullshit that are like, a couple of 100,000 followers, 1 million followers, anything like that, and it's not the right info to get out there? It has to annoy you, it being active on social media.
Not really anymore.
No?
because everyone ends up in my clinic anyway eventually. You know, it used to annoy it used to annoy me when I wasn't busy. I'm at capacity now, so as long as my doors stay pretty full, Christ, people can say whatever they want.
You're actually paying the influencer to misfeed everyone else so they come in.
Carnivore diet, keep doing it.
I'm the antidote to the misinformation for a lot of people. Or what will happen invariably is, so I'm not a cheap service, like I'm pretty expensive to work with. So people often go through loads of bullshit things first, and then until they realize, oh God, I need to talk to him. So I'm usually the last person they talk to after they've gone through all the Mickey Mouse steps first. So I'm cool with that. I kind of like that. I'm like the end game, big boss, if you will, of
level 6.
Yeah, level.
Evan is inevitable.
Pretty much, it seems that way. Everyone is going to eventually end up in my clinic at some point. You know, whether it's for sports nutrition or, I know it's totally irrelevant to this, but I'm gone more into medicine and preventative cardiology and body image stuff lately, which is going to be really important in the next 15, 20 years. So I'll stay busy. If you see me talking shit about people on social media, I am not doing well, and I'm looking, you know, things have gone downhill.
And that's when we get you back in the podcast.
We'll definitely get you back on for that rant. But it's been so good having you on, and I'm no doubt we're happy to have you on again in the future, because we've only scraped the surface in the knowledge that you have, and from what you're doing, it's absolutely fantastic. Thanks so much for giving us your time today. And it's been absolutely brilliant, and an education for me even sitting here, and it always is, and thanks so much for that.
Yeah, no worries. I'll bring Emma with me next time as well.
And that's it for this week's episode of the Any Given Day podcast with myself, Evan, and Eric. Take care.
And Emma.
And Emma.
Cheers, lads.